Just grab a ball of yarn and get ready to learn about neurons and these miraculous parts of the brain. My name's Jackie Randles, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of this country and paying my respects to their elders past and present, and in particular to the Indigenous leader, the late Charles Perkins, a graduate of Sydney University whose memory is honoured in this fabulous building. I manage a program called Inspiring Australia, and we use community engagement as a way of bringing more science to more people. We're trying to take science out of universities and research institutions and into the community. So Neural Knitworks is a great example of how we can make more people aware of the important work being undertaken by neuroscientists. And what we're trying to do is amass an enormous number of neurons towards our first of a series of travelling brain installation exhibitions. So we invite you today to help us make neurons that will be linked together with others for a great big brain installation that's going to start off at Hazelhurst Regional Gallery during National Science Week in August. So first of all, we're going to hear from Professor Ian Hickie. Ian's the Executive Director of the Brain and Mind Research Institute here at the University of Sydney, and prior to that he was the CEO of Beyond Blue, the National Depression Initiative. And we're really thrilled that Ian has joined us as Neural Knitworks patron.
I think as Jackie's just indicating, it's so important for us in these areas to engage more actively with the community in promoting collaboration in the science that we do and its implication in our lives, and fundamentally promoting understanding of what we are doing. I am as a clinical psychiatrist, and I come out of the kind of brain area, and it fascinates me every day the extent to which people have no idea what goes on in their own head. Just the complexity of what you're currently doing, just what is required to be able to do something I personally cannot do. I've tried a number of times to coordinate the motor activities, the sensory activities, the visual activities, the feedback from the sensors in your fingers and arms and positions to do exactly what you're doing. And those of you who do it well don't even think about doing it, you just know how to do it. It's the most incredibly complex brain activity when you stop to think about it. But most people would have not a clue as to how that actually happens, or these marvellous things that are flashing behind me, the incredibly complex information technology that lies behind that, and how in its most basic ways it can be reduced to the individual cells that you are knitting, that you're trying to construct. And as you sit there doing that, thinking about how it is that information comes into each of those cells, how the information within those cells is dealt with, transformed, and exported onto other cells, and how it literally takes billions of those cells acting in coordination with each other to allow us to stand up, to talk, to breathe, to knit, and then do the other really, really complex thing you're doing, which is actually being with other people. I discussed with my neuropsychological colleagues the most complex human, actually cognitive activity. The smartest thing that we can do is actually interact with others. And it's actually the most challenging thing. If you think about the most complex thing to do, it's actually to read another human face and to understand that person's actual perception. Then you take a room full of faces and a room full of individual perceptions and you turn it into a group. That's a really higher order complex thing. But that's what humans do. That's what we thrive at actually doing, and that's what we need, in fact, to stay healthy. Obviously, in the human disease end, we're really fascinated or trying to respond to when those things go wrong. And they go wrong in two big areas of life. One's in development, in childhood and the adolescent period, as the brain is growing and developing, either under different genetic or environmental or other stressful influences. Something goes awry in the organisation. Hopefully when this installation comes to be put together, as those responsible, is there some coherence about the thing. Somehow it's seen to create some bigger concept in a bigger particular way. Well, that's literally what the brain is doing during the development. It's taking all the environmental influences, the genetic architecture it's got, and trying to build something that gives us the capacity to do this very complex thing we're all doing now, interacting in a complex social group, within a complex society, in a complex environment. A most tremendously interesting, and back to use the Rumsfeld thing, we don't even know what we don't know about how we actually do that, how these little cell things come together to do those very complex sets of activity. In the 21st century, we sure know when it goes astray, either during development or the other big area where it goes astray in relation to ageing and degeneration. We sure know the cost of that. So when we think about the big issues in society and we ask them people about the big illnesses and everything that matters, everyone first goes cancer, Then they go heart disease. Then they think, oh, infection, that's bad, blah, blah, blah. You actually go out and go, well, what actually ruins people's lives every day of the week in modern Australia and developing countries? It's actually problems of the brain and its influences on the mind and the other functions that we do that accounts for about 40% of total health-related disability costs. It's by far the biggest area of what stops people going to work, functioning in school, functioning in employment, remaining independent as they age. It's diseases that affect that. Now, to unravel many of those things and make further progress, we've got to try and unravel what the hell these cells are doing individually, what they do when they interact with other cells, what happens when they form circuits, what happens when those circuits are in real people, in real bodies, being influenced by things like your metabolic state or your blood pressure or other sets of factors, and how that interacts with the wider world around it. To have people stop and think about that, we need people to do exactly what you're doing. We need people to stop and think about what is that thing in there. Because it's not like my heart. I can feel my heartbeat when I run up the stairs here. All right, got to get fitter, you know. I can feel breathless when I run around and I actually realise that something's not kind of right. I can feel muscle pain. I can feel my joints aren't working in a particular way. We normally get feedback from the physical aspect of the thing, and we all have some idea of what those things actually are because we kind of see them or we move them or whatever. Most people have got no idea what's actually the bit inside that's doing all these things that we most cherish. It's also interesting to ask people what they most fear, because actually most people fear most losing control of their inner capacity. They fear mental illness, they fear dementia, they fear stroke, they fear loss of capacity of the internal bit. Because at some level they reckon if they're not in control of that, their life would be much diminished. And they're right. So the big issue for us is to engage with that. And the wider societies we live in have started to engage with that. So, for example, President Obama in the United States is leading part of the new US Brain Initiative. That's trying to work out, literally, from the cell upwards, the thing you're knitting, back through its circuitry, what is the fundamental relationship between those circuits of neurons and what we call human behaviour and cognition and movement. There's hundreds of millions of dollars going into that, and there'll be hundreds of millions of dollars more. Over in the EU, they're putting €1 billion into actually trying to understand how those individual cells function as information technology. You know, because if we could mimic it, we'd have some pretty smart machines at the end of the day. So they're literally trying to build the brain from the cell upwards. So I think Pat was saying, you want to make the map of the brain, knit it upwards. That's exactly what the Europeans are trying to do actually with electronic circuitries. Your actually knitted ones might be better. And they actually might provide us with insights as well as we think about that. So both in Europe and the US, there are big initiatives. Here in Australia, we have a national dementia initiative now supported by the current government for $200 million because of the concerns around ageing and loss of capacity as you age. And the areas I'm invested in youth mental health and brain development in childhood, they're the other big sets of areas. But unless we have a community that stops to think about how does that actually work and what does it mean to have it working. If it's working, you can come here today, you can participate, you can do the very complex visuospatial motor tasks that I personally cannot do, knit, but you can do the other bit too. You can interact with people and talk and interact and form social groups and behave in a cohesive way. Unless we come to understand that as a society and then understand that scientifically, we won't make tremendous progress. So we actually think also in Australian terms, this is one of the big industries in health, but also in technology and in science for the 21st century. But for the Australian community to actually be part of that, like the European community or the US community, we need people like yourselves to actually participate. That's where I really appreciate what Jackie and others do. To have that communication often doesn't mean sitting around with scientists who argue about what that thing at the end of that thing is, which is the end of a synapse, which is the end of a particular bit. You know, it's kind of meaningless. We need people to engage through art, through other means of expression, through other means of communication, to start to dwell on what this is all about. And then join with us in trying to find solutions to those particular problems. So I commend particularly the work Jackie's involved with of trying to combine the communication of science, not through scientists talking at you, but actually through things that people can do that allow them to participate in the business of what we're trying to do. That's what the university is trying to do here through the Perkins Centre and many of its particular sets of issues. What we try to do in the analogous Brain and Mind Research Institute down the road is bring those particular sets of activities together. But we absolutely need the participation of the community, we need the participation of artists, we need the participation of others to actually better communicate what it is that we're all concerned about. So I commend you for doing this, and I'm very proud to be the patron of the activity. Thanks, Jackie.
Thank you. So next up, I'd like to welcome Pat Pillai. Pat's a community artist with a background in science and an interest in psychology and art therapy. Following on from her interactive work last year in an exhibition called Hiromi Hotel Moon Jellies, Pat again joins her fellow artist Rita Pearce in combining art and science as Neural Knitworks.
Oh, hello everybody, and welcome to everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see so many people here. And the first thing I want to say is just to say what an honour it is to be here and to be standing here to speak after Professor Hickie. I think, you know, I'm a bit starstruck. Everyone involved in this project is interested in raising awareness of brain health, and I think that he's a really fantastic patron for us to have. I have got a science background, but I came to an interest in brain health not from looking at it under the microscope, but from personal experience with a few mental health issues. And I didn't know anything about the brain before that, so now I'm really fascinated by psychology and art therapy, because art seems to really help a lot of people, and all sorts of not just art, but the arts. So there are billions of cells in the brain. It's hard to imagine how many there are, and although I did start off with the idea of knitting a whole brain based on Brodmann's map, I was told that was a bit ambitious, so we cut down to just choosing a part of the cerebral cortex, and that's what we've got set up over there, and that's what's on the screen. The cerebral cortex is a really good place to start because it divides up into 6 nice layers. Tell me if I'm wrong, Sarah. And when the scientists study them, they colour them so they can differentiate which cell's which, and they end up looking like a rainbow. So we're going to make a cortex rainbow, which is kind of the beginning of it over there. And I'm going to show you how to create textile neurons a bit later, but I hope if the patterns work, you might already be all doing them, so we don't need to tell you anything much. And if you're new to a crochet, I hope you're already stuck into it there. I've got a couple of helpers for the day. Rita Pearce, who's my fellow artist, and she's been on this journey with me just about from the word go, really. I don't know whether you want to stand up, Rita, wherever you are.
There she is.
Oh, okay, there she is. And we've also got Marilyn Ma and Jenny Whiting, who are experts in knitting and crochet, so they'll help you if you need some help. We want to create brain cells that the scientists can use to talk about how the brain works. So on the screen, we sort of had just a few cells made, and we were invited to the 11th World Congress of Brain Mapping. We were really chuffed. And when we got there, we were just overwhelmed by the response of the scientists. So we think maybe we're getting something right. Maybe our cells are realistic enough. But if they're not, all the scientists here can tell us if they're a bit wrong. So we want you to have fun making these cells as well, because as Jackie said, this is all about engagement. You're going to learn a lot more by engaging with what you're doing than just somebody talking about it. And in the end, we want to have an exhibition that's going to do Hazelhurst Gallery proud, and then we want it to travel all around the country showing people how the brain works. So get hooked, tweet your friends. We need lots of neurons for our first exhibition at Hazelhurst during National Science Week in August. If you don't know how to knit, as I said, don't be put off. We've got these easy no-knit neuron patterns. And where are we? Oh, yes. So that's the base for them. And this one here, this is a beautiful cell, and I need to flick through a few of these slides. These are some really beautiful cells on the screen, which are on the tables over there. Most of them are made by Rita Pearce. She's really good at crochet, and she puts wire and jewels and everything in it. These ones here I made, they're a bit more functional, but there's examples of different sorts in that one. So they're on the table. There's a felted one, there's a knitted one, there's a crocheted one, there's a wrapped one. And they're in a network, and I think that's something like how the brain connects them up. As you see, I don't really know. This here, the fellow making this neuron lives in Garrawarra Residential Care Centre for people with dementia, and Rita works there as a registered nurse. Now, we were there last year as part of the Hiromi Hotel Moon Jelly project, delivering Hiromi's Art Magic package. And although I've been doing community art projects for years and love it, and I love doing stuff with other people. Doing it there and just seeing the effect on these people who sometimes can't even string two words together, but they have a body memory somehow of this. They got so much joy out of it. It just brings tears to my eyes, really. So that fellow there made this, and he even sewed the button on. So they can remember to do these things and get joy out of it. And I think that was really worthwhile to go on with. So all of a sudden, just from doing things for fun, it became more like art-science collaboration is something we should follow. And it kind of snowballed from there. So we've been out to schools. Unfortunately, our helper there Jerry couldn't be here today, but she loves teaching kids how to knit. We went to Relay for Life with Anstow, and we've been to Hazelhurst a few times. So all those neurons there actually in that picture were made by the people at Garrawarra. So if they can do it there, and if we can have kindergarten children and under doing it in Hazelhurst workshops, then I think everybody here could do it. So this was part of the exhibition that we were in last year, and we were looking at how sort of bits of the brain that we're interested in. Rita's is on the far side, and hers was about dementia, and mine was about sort of the psychological aspects of resilience, and that's sort of where we started from before there. So I've probably lost track. So have a look at the display, at all the beautiful neurons over there. The other thing, as I said, doing things with other people, it just seems to have a way of getting people talking. So I'm in it really for the yarn and the yarning. And I hope that you all like doing it too. And I'll just go back to the brain mapping meeting. So we really appreciate the trust and support of organisations like Chiba, who invited us to that brain mapping meeting. Sight unseen, I think they were pretty brave. And the Brain and Mind Institute, Research Institute, and Alzheimer's Australia, who are all supporting us, and Hazelhurst. So a big thank you to all the scientists and knitters and everyone who's helped us get here. Thank you.
Next up will be Dr. Sarah McKay. Sarah's a neuroscientist turned freelance science writer and blogger, and you might have seen her everyday neuroscience blog called Your Brain Health.
So I used to be a neuroscientist, and I ran away from academia to become a science writer. So I don't know if there's any other neuroscientists in the room here, but if you want to run away, you can come and talk to me afterwards. I've been working as a science writer for the last 6 years, and last year I started writing, decided I wanted to. I love neuroscience and I missed that, so I started writing a neuroscience blog, yourbrainhealth.com.au. And I say I write about everyday neuroscience. I don't write about it every day, but I write about the neuroscience of everyday life. And it's given me some great opportunities. I get to be part of this Neural Knitworks team. And I used to do electrophysiology, but now I get to do things like talk about the neuroscience of knitting. So I thought it might be nice just to dig a little bit deeper into some of the neuroscience of knitting, because believe it or not, there is some out there. Our little tagline for Neural Knitworks is craft a healthy brain. So I thought I'd explain a little bit about some of the principles of brain health that we think that form neural networks. So there's 3 of these I'd like to talk about. The first one is meditation, mindfulness, and the role knitting can play in calming and de-stressing you. The second is what Ian touched on, which is the social interaction, the social connectedness that comes from being part of a knitting. And the third is the mental challenge side. So what you're doing is quite rhythmic as you're sitting there, as you're knitting or crocheting or wrapping. It's quite rhythmic and it's quite repetitive. It's quite calming. It gives you time to contemplate and think. You might have heard that some people think that knitting's the new yoga. It's become quite trendy. There's yarn bombing. I think neuroscience is almost catching up on what the woo-woo world. They've been telling us for years that meditation is good for your mind and your brain. It'll change your life. I personally have been hopeless whenever I've tried to meditate, that traditional sitting, crossing your legs, emptying your brain. I find it impossible. But I do find if I walk and practice mind emptiness or perhaps knit, I do find that it's one of the easiest ways for me to clear my mind and calm down and de-stress. There's a scientist here, I don't think he's probably here at Sydney University, and I hope I pronounce his name right, Ramesh Manocha, who's actually conducted one of the gold standards of science research, which is a randomised controlled trial looking at the impact of mindfulness and meditation on mind and brain health. He did that in the Australian workplace, and he found that in the group of people in the trial who practiced mindfulness and meditation, they had less stress, less depression, and lower levels of anxiety. And that's great. That was a trial in the Australian workplace. Believe it or not, there actually has been a survey done of knitters and the impact that knitting has on their mind health. So I've been in touch with a woman in the UK called Betsy Corkle, and I've got a few copies of her paper here if anyone's interested in reading it. It's called The Benefits of Knitting for Personal and Social Wellbeing in Adulthood. She's published that out of Cardiff University. And she surveyed over 3,000 knitters, and over 50% of them reported that knitting made them feel very happy. They knitted for relaxation, stress relief and creativity. But what was really interesting was she found a correlation between the amount of time, the number of times someone knitted a week. So if they knitted more than 3 or 4 times a week, those who knitted more were more relaxed, less stressed, calmer, happier, and had less anxiousness in their lives. So I think that was just a really nice little kind of summary of how knitting can actually produce all of those mind health benefits. And I've got a quote here from Betsy, and she says, and this fits back into how knitting and meditation and mindfulness can work to calm you. Using knitting to achieve a meditative state of mind can enable a much wider population to experience the benefits of meditation, as it doesn't entail having to understand, accept or engage in some prolonged learning period, which people often associate learning meditation. And that kind of idea puts them off a bit. Meditation and mindfulness can happen as a natural side effect of knitting. So there you go. I thought that was lovely. One of the other findings that came out of this study, and it's what we've also touched on, and it's the idea of having a knit-in, is the importance of social connectedness and social interaction. And there's some really good, strong science out there showing that people who have really strong social networks, who are really well socially connected, if you compare their health and well-being to people who are much more socially isolated, the impact of having those strong social connections is the same on their health as giving up smoking. And that's just phenomenal. People who have good, strong social networks have lower rates of heart disease, stronger immune systems, lower blood pressure, less responses to stress, and what fits in really well here is they have lower rates of dementia. So knit-ins, there's the stitch and bitch groups, perhaps not the bitch side, scrapbooking parties, all of those arts and crafts practices where people get together in a group and you know, forge those friendships, strengthen those current social connections that they have. It's just so important, and it's something that we can't really underestimate. If it's as good for your health as giving up smoking, I was blown away by that data. And the final thing that you're doing is you're learning something new. You're challenging your mind. There's a woman at Chiba called Charlene Leverton, and I've spoken to her, and she studies centenarians, so those people who live up to 100 years and beyond. And she's found that those that live longer are those that challenge their minds, that stay engaged, that stay mentally active. And doing something like knitting, well, it might bring back all those memories of your nan teaching you to knit when you were a little kid, and again, that feeds into that lovely warmth, that kind of comfort that you get from knitting. But you're learning something new, you're challenging your mind. There's those fine motor skills you're developing. You're actively creating, you're learning, you're teaching. Pat and Rita are doing an amazing job of teaching us all. It's facilitating memory formation and retrieval. And you're focusing your attention and thoughts on a task, you're being mindful, which feeds back into that idea of meditation. And it gives you a sense of pride and achievement and well-being. So those are just 3 things that I've covered. That's the mindfulness and meditation, the social interaction and the mental activity, which I just think come together just so beautifully in what we're doing and what we're trying to, the idea that we're trying to promote here in Neural Knitworks. Not so much a recipe for mind health, but a pattern for healthy mind. So thanks.
Next up will be Dr. Jenny Whiting, Jenny was once a biomedical researcher and spent years in labs studying the molecular biology of embryonic development. She's worked at the Wellcome Trust in the UK, and she's now a science communicator for the Australian Microscopy and Microanalysis Research Facility, also here at the university. Jenny learned to crochet when she was 10, and she loves the relaxation and creative expression it brings.
Thanks, Jackie. As Jackie said, I am an avid crocheter, and I learnt to crochet when I was 10 years old. And on the other side of that, I was also, I consider myself still a scientist, but I was in hands-on lab research for 18 years as well, so I definitely still consider myself a scientist, but now I'm in that nice zone of doing science communication, and with plenty of time to do crochet as well. So when I first heard about this project, it's you can imagine my reaction. It's got all those elements that I love. It's got science, it's got communication, it's got crochet and knitting and sociability and networking and creating art exhibitions. So I just, fantastic. What can I do to help? So to kind of break this down a bit, I said I learnt to crochet when I was 10 from my best friend, and for the next, 15 or so years, I did quite a lot, and then it sort of fell off my radar for a while. And when I came back to Australia after some time in London, I really wanted to create a special present for somebody that was personal and special, but didn't involve spending lots of money. And so I thought, what can I do that's actually I'm good at, that's really good at that? So I thought, I'll create something personal and crocheted. So I did that. I made her a nice set of really beautiful little crocheted coaster snowflake things, and that was all lovely. And from then on, I just really couldn't stop. And I really want to just reiterate what Sarah's said, because from my own personal experience, all those all those aspects of the relaxation, the stress relief, that creativity that's come out is something that I've really become more aware of from a personal point of view. And I'm really fascinated now that the research is actually bearing all this up, because, I think, as a scientist, the questions that come into my mind have really started to solidify, and I've got those questions is, what is it that's going on in my brain when I'm feeling relaxed, when I'm doing repetitive actions, when I'm doing the challenging, the learning part, learning how to get things together, learning new stitch patterns, even for people to learn to crochet, what's really going on in the brain? So what I do now mainly is, I still follow patterns sometimes, but what I do now is more freeform crochet and just go where I feel like going at the time without even really thinking about it. It's just letting go and letting that creativity flow. And I say that aspect of it, in even communicating through this project, is really helping that self-awareness of what's really going on. And, there's a fantastic shop which I'll plug in West Ryde, where it's like an op shop for yarn and needlecraft, and it's the most fantastic place. It's run by Achieve Australia, and they have fabulous recycled yarn and all sorts of stuff, so I get my stuff there. I now just put it out and I wait for it to talk to me, and that language is not something I really would have used before, but it is, I think, just letting go of that brain and the control and letting that creativity flow. And I found myself really getting heavily into the crochet when I've been at my most stressed, when I've had lots of intense projects happening through work with conflicting timescales, and I was actually doing more and more crochet, which seemed at one point like this doesn't make sense, but it really did. It made a lot of sense. It made me just be able to get through all that seamlessly, and I just really can't emphasize enough the benefits of doing this kind of activity. So the other thing which I really like about this, and that you may notice, I worked for a long time, for 15 years now with biomedical images. 10 years of that were at the Wellcome Trust in London, where I was collecting biomedical images from scientists, and I, working with those, realised the power of images, and particularly when you've got a tactile image, which are what all these neurons are, of really using that as a basis to explain and help people understand science and their bodies and what's really going on in an accessible way is another thing that I think that this project really brings to the whole sphere of science communication and that science and art connection. So to do a little plug, I have my t-shirts. They're actually, a whole lot of them are over there, so if you're interested in buying them, I've got a special offer on today for just $25 each. So just come and see me and we'll see what we can do. So this one and one of the other ones over there is of neurons, so you can walk around, wear them to your knit-ins and inspire people to create more neurons. So with that, I think I'll finish up and let you all get on with it.
Finally, we're going to hear from Associate Professor Amanda Salis, who's here with the Charles Perkins Centre. Amanda is a neuroscientist on a mission to help more people attain and maintain a healthy body weight throughout their whole life. Her team's work at the university's Bowdoin Institute of Obesity, Nutrition, Exercise and Eating Disorders, that's a mouthful, aims to overcome the famine reaction that makes it so hard for people to lose excess weight and keep it off. A self-proclaimed former fatty who herself lost 28 kilos and kept them off for 16 years, Amanda walks the talk of putting biomedical research into practice.
So I'd like to talk with you today about how you can feed your brain to help your body to stay lean or to become lean and stay lean. Now, it's really important to feed your brain properly because your brain controls how much fat you have on your body and where on your body you store that fat. And how this does this is your brain controls two major functions, or two important functions amongst many. One is how hungry you feel, and that determines how many kilojoules you eat. And your brain also controls how many kilojoules you burn, or your energy expenditure. And when the number of kilojoules you eat and the number of kilojoules you burn are unbalanced, you either gain fat or you lose fat. And your brain determines where on your body you gain or lose that fat. Now, with these functions in mind, it's really important that you feed your brain adequately so that your brain can perform the proper functions of regulating appetite and energy expenditure. Now, one thing that's really important to feed your brain with is good, nutritious food. Who's heard of the 5-2 diet? Does anyone? Okay. Now, when you're eating, does anyone know someone who's doing the 5-2 diet? Okay, it involves these crazy days when you're only eating 500 or 600 calories. Now, it's really hard to get a lot of nutrition into 500 or 600 calories. And if you're frequently having times when you're restricting kilojoules, there's a good chance that you're actually deficient in some nutrient. Now, the funny thing about your brain is that if your diet is deficient in even one single nutrient, then even if you're eating a lot of kilojoules, your brain will undergo chemical reactions which will actually make you hungry and which will actually drive you to eat more in order to get enough of the nutrient that your body is missing. And this happens even if you're eating a lot of kilojoules. So, and it's been shown, for example, with protein. If you're not eating enough protein, you just will not be satisfied until you've had your fill of protein. The same is true of other nutrients such as chromium or zinc. And these are all micronutrients found in food. So number one message for brain nutrition is whenever you have a choice about what to eat, make sure you choose the most nutritious option that's available to you and that's palatable to you. So a proper meal as opposed to a little latte and a raisin toast or something like that to keep you going. Another thing that you can feed your brain with in order to attain and maintain a lean body weight, body size, is to feed your brain and yourself with rich social interactions. So thank you, Sarah. That's a lovely story about social interactions. They're so important for so many aspects of health. And another thing that they're important for is for maintaining your weight. and for keeping excess fat off parts of your body where you don't want excess fat. And this was shown in some really fascinating research, which I absolutely love. It comes from mice, which they have a fair few similarities with humans in terms of the genes and how those genes function. And in this study, what happened is it was a study in laboratory mice. And normally laboratory mice are housed in individual cages where they live on their own, or they live with 1 or 2 or 4 other cage mates. And they just stay in that nuclear house, much like many people in Sydney staying in their houses or apartments. But in this study, what they did is they put all these mouse cages around this central square, a bit like the University of Sydney or your town centre, and they let all the mice come out of their cages and interact with mice from other cages. And they had running wheels and toilet rolls and things that they could play in and interact in. And it was not all happy, jolly playing either. You know, they didn't have to be happy and smiling all the time. They were fighting out there in that rich social network. They were fighting, they were having fun, but they were socially interacting. And what happened that I find absolutely fascinating is that the mice who lived in the environment with rich social interactions, they had less body fat, they had more lean body tissue, which is what we want to maintain health and independence, and they had better cardiovascular health profiles. And you may say, well, maybe that's just because they're getting out of their cages and exercising more. But it wasn't, because they had other mice that they were getting them into their individual cages and getting them to run around on wheels and on running wheels and burn just as many calories. But those mice that didn't have social interactions didn't get all these benefits of reduced fat and increased lean mass. So there was something remarkable about social interactions that was getting rid of excess fat, at least on mice. And they traced it back to a chemical in the brain called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And what this chemical was doing in response to the social stimulation, this chemical was leading to an activation of metabolic rate or energy expenditure, so the mice were just burning more calories. So the moral of that story is don't be a lab mouse, but instead be the town mouse or the country mouse. In fact, be any kind of mouse, but get out there into the community and interact with other people. Now, just before I leave off, since we're talking about yarn craft, I wanted to tell you a little bit about how yarn craft can help you with your weight management story. Now, as we know, social interactions can help, but just the fact of doing knitting and things can also help with weight management. And I have some experience with this, because here's a picture of me some years ago when I was very, very fat, and I was always feeling hungry. Well, I was always dieting, and so of course I was feeling hungry. And then when I was feeling hungry, I was eating. And one of the things, as you can see, I'm not fat anymore, thankfully. And one of the things that helped me was to keep my hands busy with a lot of knitting and a lot of crochet and a lot of sewing and crafty things. And that's one of the things that did help me to go from looking like this to this. So keep knitting, keep your hands busy so that you're only eating when you're hungry, and you too can feel like a movie star. Thank you.